Imagine just holding the weight of the entire world's suffering on your shoulders. You scroll through your feed and you see a refugee crisis unfolding in real time.
Right.
And then, you read a deeply reported piece on a dying coral reef. Or you see the devastating impact of inflation on a farming community 1,000 miles away.
It's overwhelming.
It really is. Your heart just aches for all of them.
Yeah.
You realize that your capacity to care is essentially infinite. I mean, you genuinely want to save everyone.
Yeah, of course you do.
But then you look down at your own two hands. You look at your bank account, your voting ballot, and you realize your capacity to actually act is basically zero. You are completely paralyzed.
It is a profoundly modern kind of heartbreak because we are walking around with this 21st century awareness of global pain, but we're still operating with nervous systems and political tools built for small villages.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are exploring a really fascinating set of reflection notes titled Kelly, Globalism versus Nationalism.
Dated May 4, 2026.
Exactly. And just looking at this objectively through the lens of our source, we are not here to debate partisan politics or pick a team. We are going to explore a human paradox that is arguably unsolvable.
Right, which is how do we balance the deep moral desire to care for the whole world with the immediate practical need to protect our own backyard?
It is the defining tension of our era, I think. I mean, every time you cast a ballot or every time you choose where to live or even buy a product, you are navigating this exact tightrope.
Yeah, and the brilliance of these notes is that they don't treat this as a math problem to be solved.
Right.
They treat it as a psychological reality that we just have to learn to live with.
The source material actually includes this incredibly evocative visual anchor to ground these notes, and I want to describe it for you so you can hold it in your mind as you go through this deep dive.
It's a great image.
It really is. So, picture a woman standing in the center of the frame, but her body from the waist down is transitioning into a massive ancient tree. Her roots are thick, and they are digging deep into this rocky, dark earth below her.
Grounded.
Very grounded. Now, on one side of the image, her branches are reaching up into a starry cosmic sky. You see a view of the Earth from space, and these white doves are flying outward into the infinite dark. It's vast, it's open, and completely boundless.
A perfect visualization of reaching out toward the universal thing.
Exactly. But then, look at the other side of her. Right behind her grounded trunk, there is a hyper-localized, idyllic farm scene.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
It is. You see an American flag, a classic red barn, a wooden fence, and sitting right there on a mossy rock near her roots is a simple, steaming cup of tea. It is intimate, it is specific, it is home.
That image is what the notes call the core lens of our sources. Because what we were really examining here is the tension between humanity and identity.
Humanity and identity.
Yeah. It is the magnetic pull between open connection, so that starry sky, and the doves and rooted belonging, which is the farm, the deep roots, the cup of tea. If you lean too far one way, you lose the other.
And to really understand that tension, the source starts by drawing a hard line between two words that I, frankly, use interchangeably all the time, which are empathy and responsibility.
Oh yeah, people mix those up constantly.
Right. But according to these notes, they are totally different species.
What's fascinating here is how the author breaks down the physics of those two concepts. I mean, empathy is purely emotional. Responsibility is entirely structural.
And they don't scale the same way.
Not at all.
The notes talk about this concept of the expanding circle, which I've always thought of as like the ultimate goal of being a good person. It feels like the definition of moral evolution.
Sure.
You start as a baby, and you only care about yourself and maybe your parents. Then you grow up, and your circle expands to your friends, your community.
Then your nation.
Right. And the peak of this evolution is that your circle expands to include all of humanity.
It is a beautiful, progressive path, and it is the core emotional engine of globalism. I mean, you can sit in your living room and simultaneously feel genuine, profound pain for an Iowa farmer who just lost his crop, a Syrian refugee fleeing a war zone, a Chinese factory worker facing grueling conditions, and a coastal town in Australia losing its ecosystem.
All at once.
Right. Your mind is fully capable of validating all of their suffering at the exact same time.
But that's exactly where the notes introduce this persona. They call her Kelly. She experiences what the text calls a Kelly-coded emotional burnout.
Yes, the Kelly burnout.
Kelly is someone whose instincts lean heavily global. Her core values are empathy, fairness, and the deeply held belief that no suffering is fully someone else's problem. She is like an emotional caregiver for the planet.
Which is admirable, but structurally, it is a disaster for her mental health.
I was trying to wrap my head around how this burnout actually feels, and it's like imagine you leave every single app open on your smartphone at the exact same time.
Oh, yeah.
You've got a massive 3D game running, you've got your GPS navigating, you're streaming a 4K movie, and you're downloading a massive file. The phone's processor is technically capable of holding all those applications open, right?
So the RAM is there.
It has the memory for it, just like we have the emotional memory to hold all this empathy. But the battery is going to drop to 0 in 20 minutes because if everyone matters equally, how do you decide who gets the life raft?
You can't. And that is the exact structural trap the notes are pointing out.
Right.
Empathy scales effortlessly because it costs you nothing physically to care emotionally.
Right.
But responsibility requires time, money, political capital, and physical presence. Those things are strictly finite. So when your infinite empathy crashes into your finite reality, the notes identify 3 specific structural fractures that happen.
Let's walk through those because the first one they call moral dilution.
Right. Think back to your life raft analogy. If every single person on the planet has an equal moral claim to your limited resources, whether that's your donation money, your time, or your country's tax dollars, decision-making becomes completely paralyzing.
Because you can't help everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you give $1,000 to your local animal shelter, Kelly's globalist instinct whispers, you know that money could have saved 10 lives in a malaria-stricken region.
Wow.
At some point, choosing to help anyone specifically feels like you're actively betraying someone else.
That is so dark, but so true. You end up in this state of total paralysis. You do nothing because doing something means prioritizing. And prioritizing feels like discrimination if your circle is supposed to be the entire globe.
Which leads to the second fracture, which is accountability drift.
Okay, what is that?
Well, when we try to build global systems to match our global empathy, we create massive multinational organizations or sweeping international treaties. And conceptually, that makes sense. But structurally, the responsibility becomes entirely abstract. The notes use a brilliant phrase for this, actually. They say it is like trying to hold fog.
I love that phrase, hold fog.
Yeah.
Because I think about like an international trade agreement that's meant to lift global living standards. It's a noble, empathetic goal.
Definitely.
But what happens to the factory worker in Ohio whose plant gets shut down because of that agreement? He can't go to his local mayor to fix it. He can't even go to his congressperson, really, because it's a multinational treaty bound by international law.
Nope, his hands are tied.
He is dealing with a system that makes huge decisions about his life, but it doesn't answer to him.
Precisely. The system is efficient from 1,000 miles up, but totally unresponsive on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot vote out a global supply chain.
Right.
You cannot recall a multinational bureaucracy. And when people feel they have no lever to pull, no tangible entity to hold accountable, they feel totally powerless.
And when you combine the paralysis of moral dilution with the powerlessness of accountability drift, you get the third fracture, which is emotional burnout.
The Kelly-coded exhaustion.
Exactly, because you care about everyone, you are carrying pain without any boundaries. And the source makes a profound point here, which is that care without boundaries stops being a helpful, active force in the world and just decays into a quiet, paralyzing exhaustion.
It completely flips the script on the modern narrative that more empathy is always better. Empathy without a structure to contain it and direct it will simply break you.
Yeah.
And it is exactly this feeling of structural failure, this exhaustion, this sensation of trying to grasp fog that gives rise to the pushback from nationalism.
I want to explore that because usually when we talk about nationalism, the immediate connotation is xenophobia or aggression, right?
Yeah.
But the source frames it very differently. It frames nationalism at its core as an attempt to fix the fog.
It is an attempt to define the boundaries of responsibility so that action is actually possible. If globalism is the expanding circle, nationalism is the grasping hand, trying to find something solid to hold on to.
Let's really dive into the appeal and the hidden costs of both sides, because the source material treats both with a lot of intellectual respect, which is pretty rare. We've touched on the appeal of globalism. It's morally expansive. It aligns with cosmopolitan thinking that we belong to one human family.
Right.
And realistically, it's highly practical for modern problems.
Yes, problems that don't stop at customs checkpoints. I mean, if you are looking at the realities of the 21st century, climate change, global pandemics, massive migration flows, you realize quickly that a virus does not pause to show its passport.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Carbon emissions don't respect national airspace. So the globalist argument is deeply pragmatic. If the danger is global, the institutional responsibility must scale up to match it. That's the core logic baked into the United Nations Charter, We the Peoples, or the foundation of the European Union.
But the hidden cost of globalism, as we were just saying with the fog, is the diffusion of responsibility. And the notes bring up a cultural cost, too, which I found fascinating. Globalism can inadvertently flatten out cultural differences into what the source calls a polite universal language. And
Yes.
it points out that this universal language quietly favors the already powerful.
Because open connection sounds incredibly utopian. But practically, in our current world, open connection often translates to capital and corporations moving freely across borders, while everyday workers cannot.
Wow.
The cosmopolitan winners, the highly educated, the wealthy, the mobile, they get to celebrate a borderless world because they float above the friction. Meanwhile, local-rooted communities are the ones who have to absorb all the economic disruption and the cultural shock of rapid change.
Which brings us to the appeal of nationalism. If globalism is attractive because it's vast and expansive, nationalism is attractive because it is concrete. It answers a really deep psychological need for belonging.
Human beings do not live in abstractions. We live in neighborhoods. We inherit specific traditions. We have memories and rituals tied to geography.
We need roots.
Exactly. Nationalism offers a shared language, continuity, and a defined sense of home. It tells a citizen, you are not just a random data point in a global network. You are a member of a specific story.
And it creates a defined circle of duty. It says, okay, you can't save the whole world, so start with the people to whom you actually owe protection, loyalty, and shared sacrifice. Which is, honestly, a huge relief to someone suffering from that Kelly-coded burnout.
But just as globalism has a hidden cost, nationalism has a dark, dangerous underbelly. At first glance, nationalism looks like solidarity, but the hidden cost is moral narrowing.
Moral narrowing.
Yeah. The exact same instinct that tells the community to protect our own can effortlessly slide into our own are the only ones who count.
It's the hardening of the boundary.
Exactly. Borders that are originally designed as containers for democratic self-rule can calcify. They become excuses for exclusion, cruelty, and a permanent paranoid suspicion of anyone on the outside.
The notes also call out what they term an epistemic cost, which basically means a cost to truth. Nationalism has this tendency to romanticize the nation. It tells a story that the homeland is pure, entirely innocent, or completely self-sufficient.
Right.
But historically, that is almost never true. Nations are messy, mixed, deeply interdependent, and usually have tangled, complicated histories with their neighbors. Nationalism promises total, pristine control in a world where many threats simply cannot be controlled by one state acting alone.
So we have these two opposing forces.
Yeah.
Globalism exists because reality keeps humiliating borders. Disease, pollution, and the internet constantly remind us that lines on a map are fictions.
Yeah.
But nationalism exists because human psychology humiliates globalism.
Yeah.
People need a demos.
A demos, like
Yeah.
a recognizable body of people.
Yes. A public. People want political decisions to be made by bodies they can recognize, that they can pressure, that they can emotionally invest in, and, crucially, that they can legally remove from power if things go wrong.
But I have to say, my perception of nationalism has always been shaped by modern cable news, which is to say it's framed as inherently conservative, usually about building walls or restricting trade.
Sure.
But the source points out something that completely shifted my perspective. It brings up the historical example of anti-colonial nationalism in Asia and Africa.
That is such a vital historical context to inject into this debate.
Right, because in the context of the mid-20th century, nationalism wasn't about a powerful country excluding the vulnerable. It was an engine for liberation.
Absolutely.
It was the tool that anti-colonial movements in India or across the African continent used to mobilize against massive oppressive empires. It was a colonized people looking at a global imperial system and saying, no, we have the right to rule ourselves. We demand self-determination. The strongest moral argument for nationalism is a community demanding to own its own future.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the notes provide an incredible framework for why modern globalists and modern nationalists misunderstand each other so deeply today. They call it the clash of tunnel vision.
Walk me through the tunnel vision concept.
The tunnel vision of a committed globalist works like this. Because they value expansion and universal rights, they start to believe that any concern about borders or local attachment is inherently backward, selfish, or morally stained.
Oh, I see.
To a strict globalist, defending a border just looks like prejudice. National loyalty looks like a lesser ethic compared to loving all humanity.
But that misses something huge, right? Because a lot of people defend borders not because they hate foreigners, but because they fear the dilution of their democracy. They
Wow.
fear the precarity of their labor if they have to compete with a global workforce that has no labor laws. They are trying to protect meaningful self-government.
Exactly. The globalist tunnel vision dismisses legitimate democratic anxiety as mere bigotry. But then you have the tunnel vision of the committed nationalist, and their blind spot is just as severe.
How so?
Well, a strict nationalist starts to believe that literally every supranational institution, every migration flow, or every universal moral claim is an active, coordinated attack on the sovereignty of the nation.
Right, in that mindset, any international treaty is a surrender of power. Pluralism is a weakness. The outside world is just a permanent hostile stressor.
But that misses the reality that nations do not survive solely by building walls. They survive through exchange, trade, international law, alliances, and reciprocity. So both forms of tunnel vision are profoundly flawed, which leads the source to propose the holistic vision.
The holistic vision being the acceptance that both impulses are completely human and entirely necessary.
Yes. You need globalism for problems that exceed the nation. You need nationalism for legitimacy, solidarity, and bounded accountability. The notes summarize it with a chillingly accurate sentence. Without globalism, politics becomes tribal. Without nationalism, politics becomes disembodied.
Disembodied, it goes right back to the fog. You cannot govern a ghost. And a totally globalized political system feels like a ghost to the average citizen.
You need the soil and the sunlight.
Which is a perfect segue. Because these concepts can feel so theoretical, the source does something I absolutely loved. It maps this exact paradox onto fictional worlds we all know. It uses narratives to model the political theory without the baggage of real-world partisanship.
Narratives are safe sandboxes for dangerous ideas.
They really are. Let's start with the globalist coded dream. The notes point to Star Trek. And when you think about it, Star Trek is the ultimate cosmopolitan fantasy.
Oh, totally.
It imagines a future where humanity has matured past narrow nationalism, past war, past poverty, and merged into a massive cooperative galactic order, the United Federation of Planets.
The appeal there is so obvious. It is a universe that prioritizes scientific curiosity over territorial conquest and diplomacy over tribalism. It is the absolute expansion of the moral circle. It is Kelly's dream realized.
But then, the notes contrast that with a nationalist-coded world, and they use Black Panther, specifically the fictional nation of Wakanda. And I want to be careful here because the notes explicitly say Wakanda's tension is not crude, hateful nationalism. They call it protective particularism.
Which is a brilliant term.
Think about the central conflict of that story. Wakanda is a technologically advanced, prosperous nation hiding in plain sight. And the entire moral dilemma of the story is our exact paradox. Do we preserve our people, our vibranium resources, our traditions, and our stability first by keeping our borders totally sealed?
Right.
Or do we owe it to the rest of the world, specifically the global African diaspora suffering under oppression, to open our borders, share our technology, and take on the obligations of global suffering?
Wakanda is the grasping hand trying to decide if it is safe to open. It is a nation terrified that if it embraces globalism, it will lose the very magic that makes it special.
And finally, the text offers an example of a balanced world, which surprised me. It's the Lord of the Rings.
It makes perfect sense when you view it through the holistic vision. Why does Middle-earth represent the balance? Because the peoples of that world remain entirely distinct. The elves in Rivendell, the dwarves in the mountains, the men of Rohan, the hobbits in the Shire, they all maintain deep-rooted identities.
Yeah, they have their own cultures.
Exactly. They have their own soil, their own traditions, their own governance. They do not merge into one universal, homogeneous culture.
They aren't the United Federation of Middle-earth.
Exactly. But when a massive existential threat arises, Sauron, that is larger than any one realm, they are capable of forming a fellowship. They cooperate against a shared global threat, but they do so as rooted identities. Rooted belonging and shared global cause coexist. It is the holistic vision in action.
That makes the abstract so tangible. Now, the source takes these fictional models and applies them to the real-world political landscape of the United States. And again, just as a reminder, we are strictly using the source's neutral framework here. We're looking at the mechanics of how different groups organize care.
It's an objective mapping of political instincts.
So, looking at the political right, the Republican Party, the text notes their core instinct leans towards defining the circle. They emphasize national sovereignty, strict border control, and economic nationalism like tariffs or protecting domestic manufacturing jobs.
Right, the America First framing.
Right. And the underlying moral logic here isn't necessarily malice. It is the belief that, well, you cannot help the world if you don't take care of your own home first. You have to secure the oxygen mask on yourself before helping others.
And conversely, on the left, the Democratic Party's instinct leans towards expanding the circle. They emphasize international cooperation, returning to global climate agreements, supporting multilateral institutions like the UN or the WHO, and framing human rights as a concept that exists beyond borders.
Yeah.
Their underlying moral logic is, you cannot take care of your own home if you ignore the burning world around you.
But the notes highlight something that completely undercuts the polarized yelling on cable news, which is the surprising overlaps. These are not pure diametrically opposed categories. Both parties are actually messy hybrids.
This is where the analysis gets highly pragmatic. Despite the fiery rhetoric, the boundaries between these camps are very permeable. For instance, the text points out that both parties currently share a deep structural skepticism toward China.
Oh, that's true.
Both sides worry about economic dependence, both support reshoring key industries, and both view China as a strategic competitor. That is a shared nationalist instinct, totally bipartisan.
Right. You see bipartisan support for protecting semiconductor manufacturing. Nobody wants the chips that run our cars and military to be completely reliant on a global supply chain. That's economic nationalism happening on both sides of the aisle.
Exactly.
And on the flip side, both parties practice selective globalism. Both support NATO, and both want to maintain international influence and alliances.
Which raises an important question. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the true divide is very often not between the two parties, but within them.
Wait, break that down for me. How does the divide live inside the parties?
Look at the internal factions. Within the Republican Party, you have populist nationalists who want strong borders, tariffs, and are deeply skeptical of any global institutions or foreign entanglements.
Right.
But sitting right next to them in the same party, you have business conservatives who are pro-free trade, pro-global markets, and neoconservatives who support heavy international military engagement. Those groups do not agree on the globalism versus nationalism spectrum at all.
And you see the exact same internal civil war on the left. Within the Democrats, you have progressive globalists who heavily emphasize borderless human rights, global climate justice, and open asylum policies.
Yeah.
But then you have labor-focused Democrats in the Rust Belt who are deeply skeptical of free trade and globalization because they've watched it hollow out their local unions and offshore their jobs. So if there is actually so much structural overlap, and if both parties are wrestling with the exact same internal contradictions, why does the world feel so intensely, violently divided right now? I mean, why does it feel like we are at each other's throats?
That is the crucial question of the source material. And it points to four massive structural drivers that have acted as an accelerant, causing this tension to spike into outright polarization. First, globalization shocks.
Okay.
Over the past 3 decades, the system opened up rapidly. Jobs moved overseas, supply chains globalized. And while global poverty decreased, domestic inequality skyrocketed in certain regions. For a massive segment of the working class, the lived experience was the system opened up to the world and we lost everything. That resentment is a massive fuel source for nationalism.
Wow. And the second driver.
Second is cultural change. We've seen incredibly rapid social shifts, increased immigration, and more demographic diversity. And the text notes a profound emotional split in how people process this.
Right. Some people love it. Some people fear it.
Exactly. For urban, mobile, highly educated populations, this rapid change feels like enrichment. It feels vibrant and progressive. But for rooted traditional communities, it feels like a loss of identity, a loss of stability, and a loss of the world they understood. And bridging that emotional chasm is nearly impossible.
Third is the rise of media and algorithmic bubbles. People are quite literally living in different information ecosystems. They have different emotional realities dictated by what their screens show them.
It's terrifying.
It is. It is no longer a debate of we agree on the facts but disagree on the policy. It has become we are living in completely different realities with entirely different perceived threats.
But the fourth driver?
Yeah, this is the one the source spends the most time on, and it's the one I want to really zero in on. They call it scale mismatch and describe it as the most profound structural driver of this entire global tension. Help me understand scale mismatch, because it sounds like the key to the whole puzzle.
It absolutely is. Scale mismatch is the core paradox we have been circling this whole time, fully realized in governance.
Mm.
It is the simple, brutal reality that almost all of our modern existential problems are global.
Like climate change.
Right. Climate change, viral pandemics, artificial intelligence, massive economic shifts, these are planetary forces. They operate at the scale of the entire Earth. But political power, human identity, and the actual mechanical ability to pass a law, enforce a rule, or collect a tax are still entirely national and local.
The problems are global, but the power is national and the identity is local. They don't line up.
They don't line up at all. And because they don't line up, citizens are left in a permanent, unsolvable state of whiplash. When a global crisis hits like a pandemic, citizens scream, why isn't there a coordinated global response? Why are we fighting over masks at the border?
Yeah.
But the absolute second a global body, like the World Health Organization, tries to implement a top-down solution, those same citizens immediately push back and say, wait, why are unelected outsiders dictating health policy in my town?
We demand global solutions, but we refuse global authority.
Exactly. And to help map out exactly how deeply this tension runs through our daily lives, the notes provide a breakdown of 9 distinct dimensions. These dimensions show how almost every major political or social debate we have is actually just a proxy war for the same core conflict between globalism and nationalism.
Instead of just listing these dimensions, I want to try something. I want to invent a scenario to see if we can spot these 9 dimensions in action.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's imagine a hypothetical town. We'll call it Riverton. Riverton is a working-class town with a struggling local timber industry. Now, a massive multinational green energy conglomerate comes in and offers to build a massive solar farm.
Sounds like trouble.
Right. It will bring in foreign engineers, it will require Riverton to enter a global carbon credit market, and it will heavily regulate the local timber logging to meet international climate standards. But it will inject millions of dollars into the local economy.
That is a perfect pressure cooker for our paradox. Let's see how the 9 dimensions map onto the town of Riverton's debate.
Okay, dimension 1 is individual versus collective. Now, the notes clarify this isn't exactly a clean split, right?
Right. Both sides are actually fighting for a collective.
Yeah.
The globalist argument in Riverton says, we must build this solar farm for the collective good of humanity and the global climate.
While the nationalist argument says,
We must protect our local loggers for the collective good of Riverton. Nationalism isn't individualism. It is collectivism with a strict border. They just disagree on which we matters most.
dimension 2 is idealism versus pragmatism. I see this immediately in our town. The globalist mayor pushes the solar farm with idealism. We are joining a global community. All humans matter equally. We are saving the planet.
Yeah.
The pragmatic local union leader says, that's a lovely thought, but how do my guys feed their kids next month when the logging regulations hit? Globalism asks what is right. Nationalism asks what is workable.
Dimension 3 is security versus privacy, which reframes the tension around threat. The nationalist instinct in Riverton prioritizes security through control. We don't want a foreign conglomerate owning our land and our power grid. We need sovereignty.
And the globalist side.
The globalist instinct complicates security by demanding connection. The only way to secure our town's economic future is to plug into the global green energy grid. Do we protect Riverton by closing it off or by wiring it in?
That flows right into dimension 4, which is stability versus change. This is where the emotional charge lives. The local timber families want stability. They want tradition, continuity, predictability. They know logging.
Sure.
The globalists want change, integration, and adaptation to the new green economy. One side fears the loss of their way of life, and the other side fears economic stagnation.
Dimension 5 is regulation versus free market. And the text notes this one is cross-cutting. The global conglomerate might want a totally free global market to move its capital into Riverton, but it also demands heavy global regulations on Riverton's timber emissions.
Oh, that is messy.
It is. The locals might want protectionist regulations to keep foreign companies out, but demand a totally free domestic market to log as they please. It's complex, but it usually boils down to globalism wants rules across borders, nationalism wants control within borders.
Dimension 6 is freedom versus authority. And I love how the notes point out that this flips depending on who is talking. To the globalist engineers moving to Riverton, the open borders and international trade feel like freedom.
Right.
To the local loggers, those same international carbon regulations feel like suffocating unelected authority. Both sides claim they are defending freedom, and both accuse the other of authoritarian overreach.
Dimension 7 is equality versus merit. The globalists, in our scenario, push for equality across humanity, saying Riverton has a moral duty to lower its emissions for the sake of island nations sinking across the globe.
Hmm.
Moral worth doesn't stop at the town line.
Right.
The nationalist Riverton citizens prioritize merit and priority within their town. Our citizens first. We earn this land. We deserve to prioritize our own prosperity.
Do we distribute fairness globally or locally? Dimension 8 is centralization versus decentralization. This is the structural battle. The solar farm pulls power upward, centralizing Riverton's energy decisions in a multinational boardroom and international climate treaties.
Exactly.
The nationalist pushback demands decentralization, bringing the power back down to the town council. Power moves up versus power stays close to home.
And finally, Dimension 9, tradition versus progress. This is the ultimate cultural expression of the tension. Nationalism is heritage, the logging history of Riverton. Globalism is evolution, the high-tech, integrated solar future. It is the eternal fight between preserving what we are and becoming what we could be.
When you look at Riverton through those 9 dimensions, you see the pattern the source notes point out. Globalism constantly clusters with idealism, change, broad equality, centralization, progress, and the humanity scale collective.
Yeah.
Nationalism constantly clusters with pragmatism, stability, security, tradition, decentralization, and the bounded collective.
And the brilliant unifying insight of the text is that every single one of those dimensions can be boiled down to one simple, primal, binary expansion versus definition. Globalism is the energy of expansion. Nationalism is the energy of definition.
Expansion versus definition. How far can Riverton extend itself into the global grid before it loses the very thing that makes it Riverton?
Exactly. That is the quiet fear driving both sides. The fear of either not caring enough about the world or losing yourself entirely trying to care too much.
Okay, so if this tension is an unsolvable structural reality, if we are permanently caught between expansion and definition, and the scale mismatch means our institutions will never perfectly line up with our planetary problems, how is the listener supposed to actually live with this?
It's the million-dollar question.
Seriously, how do we navigate this without succumbing to Kelly's burnout or retreating into a bunker?
The source offers what it calls the optimal balance, though it humbly acknowledges that optimal is a very tricky word when dealing with human nature. It proposes a synthesis, a mantra: care globally, commit locally.
Care globally, commit locally. That sounds like a bumper sticker, but the framework they build around it is actually incredibly rigorous. It has 3 distinct parts. Part 1 is keep the moral circle global.
This means that at the level of your core values, your philosophy, you must lean globalist. Human rights, the responsibility to fight climate change, recognizing the basic dignity of every single human being, these things must remain global. If you restrict basic human dignity only to people who share your passport, you become morally small. Your empathy should have no borders.
But then part 2 is keep accountability grounded. At the level of actual structural action, you need healthy nationalism. Systems need boundaries to function.
Right.
Taxes, laws, police powers, and political accountability must remain primarily national and local, because if you try to globalize accountability, you become structurally ineffective. You end up trying to hold fog, and the Ohio factory worker is left with nobody to appeal to.
And part 3 is the bridge between the two. Use global cooperation selectively. The notes emphasize that not everything should be globalized, but some things absolutely must be.
Like what?
You lean heavily into globalism for problems that physically cross borders. Climate treaties, pandemic early warning systems, global trade standards, and nuclear nonproliferation. But you intentionally keep things local when they require cultural nuance, social trust, and enforceable responsibility like cultural norms, welfare systems, public education, and community policing.
It boils down to a very powerful sentence in the text, which I want to read verbatim because it hit me so hard. Care about everyone, but don't pretend you can govern everyone.
It is a profound recognition of human limits.
So how do we visualize this balance? I want to return to that visual anchor from the very beginning of the deep dive. The woman transitioning into the massive tree.
Yes.
The notes frame this balance exactly like a living biological system. It's gardening. Globalism is the sunlight. It represents expansion, reach, openness, energy from the outside. Nationalism is the soil. It represents roots, structure, nourishment, holding firm to the ground.
It is a brilliant metaphor because it doesn't just explain the balance, it explains the pathology of the extremes perfectly.
Let's look at those extremes. If you have too much sun, too much globalism without any roots, You dry out. You become a cosmopolitan ghost.
Right.
Everything is vast, your empathy is infinite, but you have no actual structure to affect change. Nothing is yours to protect. You are Kelly, completely burned out, caring about everything and doing nothing.
But then look at the other extreme. Too much soil, too much nationalism without any sunlight, without any open connection to the outside world. What happens to a tree buried entirely in the dark?
It dies.
It rots. Nothing grows. A society that entirely closes itself off becomes isolated, paranoid, intellectually starved, and eventually it suffocates itself.
You have to adjust, depending on the season. Sometimes the tree needs to reach higher, sometimes it needs to dig deeper.
This raises an important question, though, and it is a warning the text issues near the very end. There's a quiet danger here that everyone navigating this tension needs to be vigilant about. It is the danger of moral superiority on both sides.
Ah, the trap.
Right. Globalists very easily fall into the we care more trap. They view their expansive moral circle, their sunlight, as undeniable proof of superior empathy. They look down on anyone concerned with borders as morally deficient.
And the other side?
Nationalists easily fall into the we are more realistic trap. They view their pragmatic boundaries, their soil, as undeniable proof of superior wisdom and toughness. They look down on globalists as naive children who don't understand how the real world works.
But the notes strip away that arrogance from both sides. Ultimately, both sides are just trying to protect something they believe is profoundly fragile. Globalists are trying to protect the concept of humanity from tribal cruelty and global catastrophe. Nationalists are trying to protect the concept of home and self-determination from abstract, bureaucratic overreach. Neither is evil. They're just prioritizing different vulnerabilities.
And that leads to the final, incredibly poignant psychological distinction in the source text. It notes that there is a massive difference between caring about everyone and trying to carry everyone.
Caring versus caring?
Yes. Globalism can blur that line, making you feel responsible for carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders, which leads directly to Kelly's burnout. Nationalism can overcorrect it, telling you to just drop the weight entirely, look away, and only care about yourself.
So the goal is somewhere in the middle.
The healthiest place, the optimal balance, is maintaining your structural boundaries without closing your heart.
Which brings us to our ultimate takeaway for you, listening right now. If we distill this entire massive deep dive into one thought to carry with you, it is this. Globalism asks you to open your heart. Nationalism asks you to define your hands. Your heart can be infinite. Your hands cannot.
Wisdom is learning how to live in the gap between the infinite heart and the finite hands.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought, something to mull over on your own that builds on everything we've talked about today, but takes it a step further. As our lives move increasingly, almost inevitably, into the digital realm, how does the internet scramble this entire equation?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If your deepest sense of community, your quote-unquote roots, and your daily intimate interactions are with people scattered across the globe in digital spaces, Discord servers, subreddits, virtual worlds, rather than the people physically living in your neighborhood, where exactly does your local responsibility begin and end? How do you define your soil when your world is almost entirely made of sunlight?
It is a question that will undoubtedly define the next century of how we organize human care.
It really will. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the tension of our times. We encourage you to look at your own life, look at the news this week, and ponder where you draw your own lines of accountability. Keep your heart open, but know where your hands are needed. We'll see you next time.